Good evening, my fellow SAP students. What I wanted to talk to you about this evening was the basic accounting equation. Your basic accounting equation equals assets equals liabilities plus equity. Now that is the accounting equation in its most basic sense. And you can go through and make the accounting equation more elaborate to add more variables to it, but this is basically what the accounting equation is. Now, the accounting equation is very significant in SAP FICO because the accounting equation is used in SAP for FICO. Yesterday we discussed the balance sheet and the profit and loss account. Now, in the balance sheet, you specifically have assets and liabilities and equity, and the assets must be the same as the liabilities and the equity, and that's why they call it the balance sheet, because it must balance out. Now, I've taken this information directly from the spreadsheet that I had in the presentation yesterday, but this is just an example of some assets. Your bank account, cash in hand, property, automotive debtors, that's your customers really. Investments, bonds, communications equipment, computer equipment, intellectual property, goodwill, and prepayments. And that's just an example, and I'm sure that there's a lot more assets than a person can put in their business. So your assets, and then you have your liabilities, which we discussed yesterday as well. And your liabilities are things that the business owes. So your liabilities would be your loans and your creditors. Creditors are people that the business owes money to. Accruals are things that the business has purchased but has not paid for yet. Depreciation and maintenance costs is just an example of what a liability is. Now, what the equity is basically in the profit and loss statement, you take the income or the revenue and you subtract the cost of sales from that, and then what would happen is you would come up with your gross profit, and then after you have your gross profit, you take out your tax, and then you take out like maybe your finance expenses and any other expenses that don't belong into the cost of sales. And then when you've deducted all of that, then what you would come up with would be your net profit. Now that net profit would go into an account called the retained earnings. And the retained earnings, it also goes on your balance sheet, and it's at the very bottom. So your assets equals your liabilities plus your equity or your retained earnings. Now the reason why this retained earnings is significant in SAP is because whenever you open up a new business account with SAP, one of the things that you have to do is you have to open up a retained earnings account. And this retained earnings account is going to be under the liability account general ledger, because the liabilities and the retained earnings must equal the assets. And that is why the basic accounting equation is very important, that an individual who is working on SAP FICO needs to know. So I hope you got something out of this presentation, and good evening.